Welcome back to another crochet tutorial with Cozy Rosie UK, and today I'm showing you how to make this really cute tied fringe. Now you can make lots of different knots using this fringe. We've just gone from a simple one knot here, but I'm going to show you how to do both the single and the double knot using this fringing technique. And I've featured this on the Roving Dreams bed runner, which is a video tutorial that went out last week, and you can find that over in my channel. So before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and of course the notification bell so that you never miss out on another one of my crochet tutorials again. Let's find out the materials that I'm going to be using to create this tied fringe. So I'm continuing with the same yarn that I used to make my bed runner. This is Sirdar Adventure, which is a super chunky or super bulky weight yarn, which is a roving style yarn. Probably not best suited for any hard wearing patterns or products that you're making. As you can see, because it is a roving style yarn, you can get a little bit of shedding when it's kind of left loose like this, as opposed to when it's being stitched up. But providing you give a really good trim to the ends of your tassels, just literally by, you can get a really good finish on it. We're also going to need a 12mm crochet hook and possibly a super chunky darning needle as well. This has a really nice large eye that does fit this kind of super bulky yarn in there. We're also going to need my top tip when it comes to making fringing, and that is a large book. Now the reason I'm saying that is because we need to make our fringe extra long to allow for the knots that we tie in here, so it doesn't end up looking too short once it's all joined. So I'm going to be making wrapping my yarn the length of an A4 book, which is roughly about 30 centimeters per side. So in the original pattern, I just did a single knot, but because I want to show you a double knot today, I'm going to use extra long length. So these strands are 24 inches long. And in this tutorial, I'm going to make them even longer using a larger book. So gather all of your materials and I'll show you how to make this tied fringe. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is to make our long strands. And the reason I use a firm book or a hardback book is that we can just hold the strand over the book and quite literally wrap it around. Sorry about the camera angle. My desk is not big enough to fit this book on. And you literally just keep wrapping it around until you have the number of strands that you need. On average, I use 1 or 2 strands per fringe, because as you can see, that would end up as 3 strands. And that looks, by the time it's all ruffled and free, it's quite a large amount of fringing there. And it's going to give us the length we need to tie on twice. So wrap yourself a number of strands. If you're making the Roving Dreams bed runner and you're adding this fringe on, you're going to need a total number of 36 strands. So wrap your yarn around your hook 36 times and they'll all be the same length, ready to get fringing. I'll meet you back once you've wrapped all your yarn and then we can get cutting. Once you've wrapped your yarn a number of times, make sure that you're cutting where your end is at the same end as where we started. Doesn't matter if this one's a little bit longer. And what we're going to do is just gather them together at the edge of the book and then just cut along, and it will cut all of them, and they will all magically be almost exactly the same length. You can see when I put them in half, they are all practically the same length. Once you're ready to start adding your fringing, you need to have the side that's closest to you with the right side facing up. This is going to make it really easy to add on your fringing. And the way that we start creating this tied fringe is the same way we make any of our fringings. So I'm just going to use 2 strands in each of these. So I've just picked up 2 of my strands. I'm folding them in half, making sure that they are roughly the same length. And we're going to start in this last stitch of our bed runner. I'm just going to insert my hook through that last stitch, and once that's there, I'm going to place those 2 strands, making sure that they're still the same length and they're folded in the middle, and use my hook to bring them both through at the same time. This creates a loop, and we can either be fancy and use our hook to flick them through, or we can just put our fingers through, grab those strands, bring them through the loop, and then when we pull on those strands, it tightens the loop up against our project. Now this is the traditional way to make any fringing. You just add your strands, but you do need to be careful that your total number of strands aren't going to stretch the edge of your project. So you might need to skip a stitch in between. So I'm going to skip this stitch here, insert my hook ready to get the next 2 strands. Just going to fold them in half and get those lengths to the same size. Pop those over my hook, use my hook to bring it through, and then we can just pull those, I'll take the hook out of the way, pull those strands through that loop that we created, gently pull on the strands to create our knot. See, if we were to place another one in here, it would cause our project to flare out, which is not the look we are going for. We want this to still look the same finished size once we've finished. So you can see that there's my next one. I'm going to skip that and go into that next space there. Grab another 2 strands, fold them in half so that the ends are the same length, or roughly as much as I can be. Place that fold over the hook, use my hook to bring them through and create this loop. And then just pull those 4 strands all at the same time through the big loop, ready to tighten. So continue to add all of your strands, leaving 1 stitch or row in the case in between, all the way to the end. And I'll meet you once you've added all your strands on and we're ready to start tying. So once you have all of your fringe added, I haven't trimmed this at all. I've still got those raw edges at the moment. What we're going to start to do is to pair up the 2 first knots. The way that we do that to create this tied fringe is simply taking 2 of the fringe out of the way, taking 2 from the first knot and 2 from the next knot. And we're going to tie these 2 together. Now obviously we can't just tie a knot, because that will just go all the way up. What we're going to do is almost tie it like a tie. So we're going to wrap 1 strand around the other and bring it through the loop that it creates on itself. And then we want to decide what height we want this knot to be. So you can pull it up a little bit to keep it shorter if you're doing more than 1 knot. So this one is loose, it's this one that we're tying. So we're just going to pull it gently. Don't do it too tightly because obviously you might want to adjust the heights. And that's our first knot made. And we're going to repeat this all the way down. So we've got 2 strands left from this first fringe. We're picking up the next 2. I'm going to see if there's one longer than the other. Not really. So it doesn't matter which one I use this time. And I'm crossing it over, bringing that strand around, pinching it to create a little bit of a loop, and then bringing those 2 strands through that loop to create a knot. I want these heights to be pretty similar, so I'm just going to gently tighten on that a little bit so they look the same. This one is looser on one side than the other. There we go. So now we have 2 knots, pretty much the same. And we're going to continue this all the way down. So we have 2 strands remaining from this fringe. We're going to pick the next 2. And again, we're passing over to create a loop. We pinch it. I'm going to secure those there. Bring that up and over, just to bring it through. Check it against the height of the one next to it. If it's a bit low, bring it up, so they're similar heights. And we're just going to continue that all the way down. So grab the 2 that are remaining. We need 2 strands from this fringe. I'll do one more with you. So we're going to bring, oops, move everything out of the way. So 1 over and under, create a loop with your fingers, bring it through, and then just compare it to the height of the previous knot and gently tighten when it's in place. So you can see this is how you do your first knot. You just repeat that all the way across to the end. So once you've done that, I'll meet you back, and if you're ready to, you can leave that at that. You just tie a corresponding knot in this first strand at the same height, or I'm going to show you how to complete the second row of knots. So continue to work across to the end and I'll meet you there. So once we've finished that first row of knots, you can of course leave this exactly as it is. I have placed one knot in line on that last two strands at each end so that they're all in line, but you also need to do that knot if you're going to continue to do the second row. Now I love the finished look of this second row, so let me just secure this a little bit further back so you can see what I'm doing, and we're basically repeating what we did with the previous row of knots. We're just going to work on two strands from each of the fringes. So this time I'm using the outside strand and the second strand, so we're taking it from the knots down this time. I'm using my book to secure this because I can't show you very well otherwise. So I've got my two outside strands that I've placed one knot on and two strands from the previous knot. And just like we did before, we're going to create a tie knot, as in a knot you would make with a tie, and just gently place that into position the same way we did before, whatever height you want that to be. And we continue, so we move on to the next knot, pick up those two strands, doesn't matter which two, and we tie that knot again. It's by creating that loop and feeding those ends through. And you'll see why I like this so much in a moment, because it creates this diamond space in between. We've got two strands, there's the next knot. We just take two strands from that next knot, oops, and tie that next tie. And obviously each time you're making a knot, you are using a little bit of yarn, so your ends are going to become a little bit uneven. And one end is going to be shorter than the other, obviously. Somehow I've managed it, there we go. But I think it's worth it because it does create this wonderful diamond effect. So when you are kind of tying this next round, make sure you choose your longest strands to re-wrap around where you can. But it's just the same knot worked around, making sure that you've got those knots at similar distances, and it's just going to create that wonderful diamond effect. And obviously if you've got a super long fringe, you can continue to create these knots all the way down and make it a part of your pattern, or you can just do, as I'm going to do, is just these two kind of rows of knots to create this finish to the edge of the blanket, or in this case a table runner. But you can feature this on your scarves, your shawls, so many different patterns. So continue to work all the way down, tying your second knots, and I'll meet you at the end, ready to show how we're going to trim these ends. So keep working across and I'll meet you in a moment. So once you've completed all of your knots and you've done your 2 layers all the way across, I really love this effect. I hope you're liking it as well. And of course I need to see what projects you put it on. However, we do need to talk about this little section. Now obviously you're going to have some fringing is going to be different lengths to the others, and actually some of them are quite dramatically different. I've got some short ones up here. Now I'm not going to worry about this too much. I'm not going to be too exacting. I'm just going to cut off these longer ends as if I'm a hairdresser, not going too mad or too exacting. I just want to make them more similar in length, so that those long little fluffy bits at the bottom are just not going to be there anymore. So I'm just going through with my scissors, taking off any of these really, really long strands that are kind of waving about in the air, and making sure I've got a nice clean edge. Sometimes I'll do this with the project just hanging over the back of a chair, so that they're all the same length, you know, when they're hanging. If I'm making a jumper, or not a jumper, a sweater, or a, oh my god, when I'm making a fringe for a scarf, I would definitely have this hanging over the back of a chair, just so that all the ends are similar lengths. You see there's quite a few longer ones at this end. But this is why it is important to start with all the same or very similar length. This is my last cut. Done. And although it's not perfect, it's a lot straighter edged than I had in a moment ago, and I'm very, very pleased with this beauty. Still got my book holding this down, with the beautiful finish of this knotted fringe. If this was an acrylic yarn that I've used, I would just gently steam it to kind of get the waviness out of these strands. However, this does have a 20% wool content, so I'm not going to do that, because unfortunately it would probably cause it to shrink a little bit using any heat on this. So I'm just going to leave it. I know it drops out. The other end of my project is a lot smoother. You know, in time it would just kind of wear itself down. And that is how you make a tied fringe. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial and you're ready to put this into practice, be it either on a ribbed scarf, or adding it to the bottom of a jumper or a summer top, or of course making your own Roving Dreams bedrunner. Make sure that you've hit that thumbs up if you've enjoyed this tutorial, and of course hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss out another one of my crochet tutorials again. And I'll see you again soon. Until then, keep it cozy.